Okay, so let's go straight to it. I am going to be talking tonight. Not every class we've done in this series has been about the life of a person, whoever we've chosen, whether it's an actual historical person or if it was a character like the person, whatever. Everyone we've discussed the life story of the lesson. Today will be a little bit different. It's not going to be so much about the meat in the Bible and the lesson for us from the life story of King David, whose yard site is Bezrat Hashem, God willing, on Shavuos, right? Coming up this coming week is the yard site of King David, Saturday night, Sunday. But instead we're going to talk more about the history of how he was born, his lineage. I promised last week we would talk about it. And then maybe we'll see after Shavuos, maybe do another class on the story of King David and his life and how he became king and the book of Tehillim. Maybe. We'll see what we're feeling. That's already in 2 weeks. So maybe Chad will have a baby. So I don't know. We can't think so far ahead. Not baby, right? Next, we'll see. Bezrat Hashem, right? So let us talk about the history of King David. And I'm going to address this class. Then we'll have 3 parts to it. We're going to have 3 parts. We're going to first talk about the lineage of King David from the family of Ruth, who, as we discussed last week, is a Moabite. And we discussed last week all of the issues that are involved if a Moabite person is allowed to ever marry and integrate into the Jewish community. The second part of tonight, we'll talk about not just the history of Ruth and the Moabite, why there's a Moabite influence into the history of the soul, rather, of King David, but we're going to talk about all of the family, this actual birth of King David himself, which is shrouded in terrible story and mystery and a very difficult to understand story. That's the rated R part for Varsha here yet, but that's the rated R part. And then the third part will be the Kabbalistic part of why the soul of Moshiach has to come in this slightly convoluted and difficult to understand way. Got it? So let me begin. I kind of jumped ahead. Good evening to everyone that's watching us. Good evening, Gabby. Good evening, Gail. Good evening, Amuna. Good evening, Shira. Let me start by saying tonight's class is dedicated in the memory of Yitzchak Tzvi ben Yosef. And the Shaman should have an elevation. And now let me say a joke. And then we'll start. Okay, that was just introduction. The joke is a good joke. I've said it before. But it's a good joke about this guy that was mentally insane. You know, the people that are Meshuggah? And then there's people that are certifiably Meshuggah. They're certifiable, you know what I'm saying? They're not just Meshuggah. They're certifiably Meshuggah. That's like, you know, that's what? What's the difference? It's hard to explain. One certified, meaning it's like full-fledged, like it's not a subjective opinion of this crazy person. It's a hard fact that this guy is legitimately crazy. So there was a guy who was legitimately crazy. And they put him into this institution. And for many years, he was there. And he went through therapy and rehab and doctors and counseling. And after years of intensive therapy, the doctors decided that he was normal. And he's ready to go out into the real world. He can get a job. He can live his own life. And so they finally give him his exit interview. And they sign the doctor gives him a note that he's normal. He's healed. He's no longer Meshuggah. He has a doctor's okay. He goes, he applies for a job. He gets his first job interview. Comes to the job interview, everything goes well. He learned how to respond, how to be polite, how to wait, how to say please and thank. Everything he did excellent. It was an excellent interview. Finally, the interview's over, and the interviewer says, "That's it. Do you have any questions for us?" Right? They normally do. Any questions for us? So he says, "Yes, I have a question for you. Are you normal?" So he asks the interviewer. The interviewer says, "Am I normal? I think I'm normal. I hope I'm normal. I'm not sure if I'm normal." He says, "You only think you're normal. I have a doctor's note to prove that I'm normal." Okay, so we're going to talk today about the story of King David and how he needed, not a doctor's note, but he needed a rabbi's note. And he needed tremendous rabbinic intervention and a lot of Talmudic dispute to even be certified as a Jew. To even be considered a Jew, let alone a king, to even be considered a Jew. So last week, we learned all about the story of Ruth, which, God willing, on Shavuos night, we'll read through the Megillah of Ruth, and we'll hear all about her. And we talked about it, discussed last week, because of the converts and because it's the yard site of King David. But as we discussed, she marries Boaz, as we discussed last week, right? Boaz was her cousin once removed. Boaz says, let me go first ask this other man, Ploni Almoni, the brother of your father-in-law Elimelech, whose name was Tov, and he doesn't want to marry her, so Boaz marries Ruth. And Boaz had a meeting of 10 elders of the city outside the gates. If you remember, we discussed this last week. This is important. Boaz calls a din Torah of 10, not just 10 random people he found on the street, but 10 of the elders of the city. The Ziknei Ha'ir. The Chachamim, the wise people. What? The Beis Din of Boaz. And Boaz himself was a tremendous scholar. Boaz knew what he was talking about. Boaz was a very, very wise man. He was a very respected leader in the community. And so Boaz gets this Beis Din together of the leaders of the community, and he asks them clearly, am I allowed to marry Ruth? As we discussed last week, the verse says very clearly, Lo yavai amayni u'mo'avi bekal Hashem, that an Ammonite and a Moabite may not be ever married into the community of Hashem, ad olam. Ad olam means forever. An Egyptian who marries a Jew, the Egyptian converts, let's say, so his children are not allowed to marry Jews. The next generation can't, but the third generation already could. But an Ammonite and a Moabite, and the Torah gave us two reasons what they did was so terrible. Number one is, as we mentioned, we read this last week, that the Moab, when the Jews were traveling out of Egypt and we were hungry and we were tired, instead of helping us and giving us food and giving us access to go straight to the land of Israel, instead they came out with an army to stop us from going, and they fought against us. So, because they came to fight against us, therefore they proved their cruel nature. They're never allowed to marry into the community of God, into the community of the Jewish people. The second reason is because they hired Bilam. Balak was the king of Moab, and Balak hired Bilam, who was a sorcerer, to come and curse the Jewish people. Because they tried to curse the Jewish people, also proved their wicked nature, and therefore they cannot marry into the Jewish community. So Boaz asks his court, these 10 elders, Ruth is a Moabite. Am I allowed? And we discussed last week, she was actually a granddaughter of King Eglon, who was a king of Moab. So she wasn't just a Moabite, she was a royal lineage. She was a princess of the king of Moab. So am I allowed to marry her? And what do they rule? What was the ruling last week? Who remembers? Why? What was the ruling? What was the basis of their saying that you're allowed to marry her? Because she's a woman, not a man. And the Torah says, Amoni v'lo Moavi v'lo Moavis, a Moabite male, not a Moavis in the feminine tense, meaning the prohibition is only on a male, not on a female. Amoni v'lo Ammonis. An Ammonite man is forbidden to marry to the Jewish community, but not an Ammonite woman. Got it? So therefore, this is the tradition. This is how they learn out the verse. The verse is written in the masculine tense, and therefore only the men are forbidden to marry a Jew, not for a female Moabite convert. She is 100% allowed to marry a Jewish man. We go by the mother being Jewish. Okay, so but the other nations go by the father. The fact that Jews go by the mother is unique to the Jewish people. All other nations, and including even the Jewish people before the giving of the Torah, the fact that Judaism goes by the mother was part of what changed when we converted at Mount Sinai. Before then, you went by the father. So that's the way all the nations went. Okay, so let's now talk about when David HaMelech becomes we all know the story of David HaMelech going to kill Goliath, right? And maybe we'll do a class more into the story. I don't know. I haven't decided. We'll see. But we all know the story that there was a giant called Goliath who came for 40 days. He was antagonizing and cursing the Jewish people and saying, your God has abandoned you, etc., etc. And Shaul, the King Saul, was very desperate, didn't know what to do with this guy. Said, whoever goes to kill him will get my daughter's hand in marriage, right? Who comes forward? David HaMelech was a young lad, a shepherd boy. His older brothers were soldiers in the army. So David had come to visit his brothers to bring them a care package from their mommy. You know, the mother sent, I don't know, some homemade muffins, some ragalach, whatever she made for them. Well, they ate muffin, but whatever. She made some homemade desserts. So he came to bring from his mother the homemade stuff. He comes and he hears this terrible giant cursing God in a terrible, terrible way. So what's this? They said that Goliath is cursing the Jews and no one knows what to do with him. So David HaMelech says, I'm going to go kill this giant, right? And he comes to Shaul, and Shaul says, come, let me at least put you on my armor. He puts on the armor of Shaul HaMelech, of a king. Now, Shaul was very, very tall. It's about King Saul that he stood his head and shoulders above the nation. He was a very tall person. David HaMelech was a young man. He was a boy. He was a teenager. He was, I don't know if he was petite, but he was a teenager. He wasn't the tall, strong King Saul. He was much, much smaller than King David. That's for sure. What happens? David HaMelech puts on the clothing of Shaul, and Shaul he sees how the clothing, the shield, the armor fits the body of King David. How King David grew into the clothing, and the armor fits perfectly on him. Shaul gets very, very nervous. He saw that the clothing that was the shield and the armor of the king, which should have been way too big for King David, is fitting King David perfectly. He gets very, very afraid. And King David, who's very sensitive and aware of how other people's feelings, sees how Shaul got afraid. He says, I don't need the armor. It's too heavy for me. I'm not used to wearing such heavy armor. They went out without any armor on. He takes his slingshot with 5 little stones, right? And he throws the slingshot. He pulls it back right in between the eyes of Goliath. The helmet went till here. And then between the eyes, he hits the rock, hits him between the eyes. He falls on his face. And then David HaMelech runs forward and takes out the sword of Goliath. And with Goliath, his own sword, he chops off his head. And he holds up the head, and all of the soldiers run away. And that's, they live happily ever after. What? That's not when it started. He was cursing the Jews before that. So let's not pretend like the hate started because David killed Goliath. That's not what happened. Oh, Shaul got very, very afraid even before. And then later, Shaul got even more jealous because how popular King David was. He tries to kill him. So a very interesting story. But let's not get too distracted. Let's focus on this moment when King Shaul sees that the clothing fits David. He realizes he's not a regular boy. He gets a little afraid. So what happens? The Gemara in Yevamos tells us a fascinating story. The Gemara in Yevamos, you have it here. You have it here in your sheets. The first text number 1. You see it's a very long Gemara. I have it in Hebrew and in English. And I skip a little parts here and there, but the basic idea is there. The lineage of King David, Yevamos. Let me zoom in. Okay. This is from Yevamos, page 76b. So Rabbi Yochanan said, the verse states, and when Shaul, King Saul, saw David go forth against the Philistine, meaning Goliath, he said to Avner, the captain of the host, Avner, whose son is this youth? And Avner says, as your soul lives, O king, I cannot tell. The Gemara goes on, who is this? He knew he was, he knew who his father was, he meant his lineage, whatever. And Avner responds, as your soul lives, I don't know the answer to this question. Which is a very strange way to answer a question. Just say, I don't know. Meaning he knew, but he was afraid to say, or he knew that he didn't know. It wasn't like, I'm not sure who he is. There was, as your soul lives, O king, I don't know the answer. I cannot tell. So he gets worried. Then there's a whole discussion about the father. At that point, Doeg HaAdomi, Doeg the Edomite, he was one of the advisors of King Shaul. He says to Saul, before you inquire as to whether or not he is fit for kingship, inquire as to whether or not he's even fit to enter into the congregation. What is the reason for such a doubt? It is that he descends from Ruth the Moabite. So why are you asking Avner if he can even be fitting to be a king? The guy's not Jewish. His father is a descendant of Ruth. Ruth is a Moabite, and the Moabite cannot enter into the community of God. That's what Doeg says. So Avner responds to Doeg, and he says to him, we already learned that there's no room for such concern. As the verse states in Deuteronomy, which we quoted last week, that an Ammonite man is barred from entering into the congregation, but not an Ammonite woman. And similarly, a Moabite man is barred from entering into the congregation, but not a Moabite woman. So Doeg responds to Avner. And he says, however, if that is so, say that the verse that renders it prohibited for a mamzer, you know what a mamzer is? A bastard, a child born out of wedlock. So the verse says that a child born out of wedlock cannot enter into the community of God either. Now the word mamzer is written in male tense or in female tense? Male. Mamzer is male. I'll explain, I'll read inside. Mamzer is male. So maybe based on your logic, since it says an Ammoni in male grammar and not in feminine grammar, and therefore you're using that as a reason to say that only a male Ammonite is forbidden to marry the Jewish people, but not a female Ammonite, or a female Moabite, say the same thing about a female born out of wedlock. The verse only says a mamzer, which is written in the masculine, child born out of wedlock, which would mean that according to your logic, a girl born out of wedlock, which is where a married woman had an affair with another man, should also be allowed to marry another Jew, which is not the case. Let's read the Gemara and I'll take questions. So I'll start the paragraph again. So Doeg said to him, however, if that is so, say that the verse that renders it prohibited for a mamzer to enter the congregation is only prohibiting a male mamzer, but not a female mamzer. So Avner replied, it is written a mamzer, which should be understood not as a noun, but as an adjective, denoting a mum zar. The word mamzer can be two Hebrew words combined. Mum is a blemish, zar, foreign, strange, meaning that this person is a combination of a strange blemish, one who is defective due to a forbidden relationship, and this applies to males and females alike. Okay, so your proof about the mamzer is not a good proof, because there the word mamzer is not a male or female word. It's a description of a foreign blemish, a mum zar. Let's continue. And I'll take questions. Let's read it. Doeg retorted, if so, say that it is prohibited for only an Egyptian man to enter into the congregation, but not an Egyptian woman. Same thing. What does it say about the Egyptian person? It says, La Yavai Mitzri. Mitzri is written in male tense, male grammar. So the same way that it says Moavi, and we said Moavi, not Moavis, say Mitzri below Mitzris. But that's not the law. Both a male and a female Egyptian cannot marry into the Jewish community. So Avner answered, here it is different. As the reason for the prohibition recorded in this verse with regard to Ammonites is explicit. The Torah gives a reason why we're not allowed to marry the Ammonites and the Moabites, because they did not meet you with bread and with water on the way when you came forth out of Egypt. Since it is the way of a man to go forth to meet guests, but it is not the way of a woman to go forth, females are not included in this prohibition. Understand? So he's arguing still. He says, yes, it's true that the mitzvah is also in the male tense, but who made the Jews suffer in Egypt? Both the males and the females. Who was the one that caused the Jews to suffer when they left Egypt and were traveling to Israel? Only the Moabite soldiers. Are women soldiers? No. So since the Torah gave us an explicit reason why you cannot marry a Moavi, but not a Moabite, it's clear that it's the way of the man to go forth. Really, the men should have gone forth to greet the guests, not the other way around, but they came forth like soldiers to prevent them from going through their land. Though a counter, still, the women also could have gone. The man should have gone forth to meet the men, and the woman to meet the woman. Abner was silent, as he did not know how to respond to this objection. Okay? Before I continue the Gemara continues. But let's just clarify what's going on over here, so it's clear. King Saul is very afraid about this young put on his armor, and that the armor fits him. So he turns to his advisor, his general Abner, says, Abner, who is this boy? Is he fit for the kingdom? And Abner says, I'm afraid to answer that question. I don't want to give you an answer, but my soul, I swear I cannot answer. Doeg the Edomite, the advisor of the king, he's the advisor, he's the paid consultant. That's what he's there to give opinions, right? So he says, forget about if he can be the king. This kid is from blemished lineage. He's not Jewish. He comes from the family of Moab. Comes from the family. Of course we did. It's a King David. Of course we did. Okay, so they go. So Doeg and Avner get into a very complex Talmudic debate in front of King Saul. While King David is going to kill Goliath, they're debating the Talmud over here. Very interesting. And Doeg the Edomite keeps on bringing proofs that. So Avner says, "Sorry, don't say he's forbidden. It says Moavi below Moavis." Now I want to point out that even though Avner is arguing with Doeg, Avner was not convinced enough about this truth to say it to King Saul before, right? Notice that when King Saul asked him, what does he say? What does he say? I have no opinion. I swear I can't answer, right? That's what he said. I swear I can't answer that question. Now that Doeg is saying he's not Jewish, that he's a blemished child, so now Avner is debating him back and forth. says it's a male. It says the male text. Mamzer, a child born out of wedlock, is also male text. No, we can answer that mamzer means mumzar. It means a blemish is strange. Doesn't mean a male or female. But it says mitzri and male. But you can answer by mitzri, it was male and females involved. By the Moavites and by the Ammonites, it was only the men that should have gone forth, not the women. Doeg says, nah. Why couldn't the women go forth to meet their Jewish cousins, female Jewish cousins? When you have guests coming, only the men go to greet them. The women also come out with food and with water, and the women also could have helped. So the proof of the verse does not prove it's only the men, not the women. And therefore, I'm telling you that when it says in the verse that a Moabite cannot marry to the community of God, says Doeg, that means both males and females. Okay? There's no conclusion. So if you're King Saul, what would you do? If you're King Saul, how would you respond now? This is the guy that's going to marry his daughter, by the way. This is the guy that's going to marry his daughter. So he's a little worried about this. Is he Jewish? Is he allowed to marry his daughter or not? So what does King Saul say to do? Let's continue. Turn over your page now. Let's go to the next side of the page. I told you it's a long Gemara. I skipped parts of it, but it's very interesting. So King Saul says to Doeg, go and inquire about the matter in the study hall. He went to the study hall and asked, is this law only for males or also for females? So they said to him, the halacha is an Ammonite man is forbidden, but not an Ammonite woman. A Moabite man is forbidden, but not a Moabite woman. That's the rule. That's the halacha. So Doeg, you think he's accepting this ruling from the yeshiva? Absolutely not. So Doeg raised before them all those objections from the other who had disqualified from entering to the congregation. About the mamzer, about the mitzri, and he disproved them all. And they were silent. They didn't know how to respond. Doeg then wanted to proclaim that David was disqualified from entering into the congregation. He wanted to make a ruling in the court, in the Beis Din, that David is from tainted lineage. He may not marry a Jewish girl. He may not marry the king's daughter. And all of a sudden, a man stood up. His name was Amsa, the son of a man whose name was Yisro, the Israelite. He had married Abigail, the daughter of Nachash. Abigail is the sister of King David, so he's related to the family. And elsewhere it's written that Amsa's father was called Yeser, the Yishmaelite, meaning, says Rava, I'm doing this quickly, that he girded his sword like Yishmael. He pulled out his sword like an Arab. And he said, whoever does not accept this halacha, that the ruling of a Moabite is only a male and not a female, I shall stab them with this sword. Can you imagine how heated this conversation got in the yeshiva? He literally pulls out his sword. So whoever argues with the accepted tradition that only a Moabite man and not a Moabite woman can marry a Jew, I will stab them with this sword. Yeah. This is a tradition that I received from the court of Shmuel, Haramasi, that an Ammonite man is prohibited from entering into the congregation, but not an Ammonite woman. A Moabite man is prohibited from entering into the congregation, but not a Moabite woman. Okay. It is a fascinating Gemara, but it leaves us with a tremendous question. King David is the father of, or the great-great-grandfather of Moshiach. The entire kingdom of the Jewish people, the entire Davidic dynasty, the leaders, the kings of the Jews are all from David HaMelech, King David. Even if it's correct that King David's great-grandfather or grandfather, Boaz, was allowed to marry, great-grandfather was allowed to marry Ruth, why would God make it that the lineage of Davidic dynasty, of the kings of the Jewish people, should come from such a questionable, uncertifiable source that permanently there should be questions about the lineage of King David? It's a very big question, right? Yes, Vivi, it's a good question. It's a big question. Why would God make this? Meaning, so we have the whole back and forth. And then he pulled out a sword, and that's how you answer a question in yeshiva. We try to have an intellectual debate. It's like today's political discussions, right? Whoever doesn't agree with me, I'll kill you with my sword. We're having an intellectual conversation, not right? So what's going on there? So I'm going to give you only one answer, but it's a beautiful answer. I love it. It's a very nice answer. It's an answer from the Morale of Prague. Then we're going to go, we have two more steps after this. The Morale of Prague. The Maral Prague, heard of the Maral Prague? Rabbi Yehuda Loew, the author of many, many books. He's the one that made the Golem. He lived in, Rabbi Yehuda Loew is his name, tremendous scholar who wrote many books of Kabbalah as well. He made the Golem, big, very, very holy person. He has many books on philosophy, on the Haggadah. So he explains as follows. Why does King David need to come from the family of Ruth, from the family of Moab? The Moabites were cruel people. It's a cruel nature. Why? Let's say that the halacha from Moshe and Sinai is that a Moabite, only a Moabite man cannot marry not a Moabite woman. And that's what this guy with the sword, Yisra, the Ishmaelite, or the Israelite, was arguing, that I have received tradition from the court of Shmuel, that it's a tradition of Moshe and Sinai. This is not a limud, a way of translating the verse to explain that it's only a Moabite man, not a woman. But I have a tradition going all the way back, that this is the way it is. The Torah only forbids a Moabite man, not a Moabite woman. Obviously, God wanted it to be this way, that the family of King David should come from a Moabite woman. But why? The Moabites are not good people. The logic of God's prohibition in the Torah, one of the 613 commandments, not to allow a Moabite to marry into the Jewish community, still applies, even if technically it's only on the man, not the woman, but spiritually. In truth, King David should come from Moab. How does it make sense? She was from the princess of Moab, even better. So how that makes it better or worse? She was a princess. Her grandfather was King Eglon, trying to kill Mazel Tov. That makes it worse. She's not just a Moabite. She represents the kingdom of the Moabites. She represents the creme de la creme of Moab. So we're not just giving you Moabite blood into your blood, O King David. We're giving you the best Moabite blood, the princess of Moabite blood, from the family of the kings of Moab. Says the Maral Prague something very beautiful. If you have a seed from a tree and you plant that seed, what's going to grow? A tree similar to whatever it came from. Right? So we had an apple tree. The seeds of the apple tree are going to produce an apple tree. Apples. And the seeds of an orange will produce oranges. Why? Because the seed of something maintains the property and the characteristics of the thing that it has. And therefore, when you have children, they look like you or like your wife. They carry your style, they carry your DNA, they carry your personality, they carry your spiritual DNA as well, not just your physical DNA, etc. So the Jewish people all carry certain genes, certain DNA that we all have. We all have from Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, we all have these genes. And they're beautiful genes. But in order for someone to become a king of the Jewish people, he needs to have something that's not similar to the properties of all the other Jews. I forgot one point. So how do you make a tree different? If you want to introduce a whole new flavor into the fruit of a tree, a whole new color into the fruit of the tree, what do? You have to do harkava, which in English means you have to graft the tree. What's grafting a tree? You take you know what grafting is? Grafting is you take a branch of a different kind of tree and you attach it. It takes some super glue. I'm just joking. It's a whole process how to do it. I was learning with Sharon, my boys actually Googled how do you do it. You basically take you cut open a branch, and then you attach another branch of a different tree onto this tree, and you tape it together and you let them grow, etc., until eventually this new branch grows from the roots and from the trunk of the old tree. So you can put an orange branch onto an apple tree, and you get something tangerine grows. I don't know exactly. That's the idea, though. That's the idea. What? Yes, that's a good question. It's forbidden, not with trees. We're not allowed to do it, but we're allowed to eat the fruit of it, etc. But you're right. So the point is, all the Jews are all parts of one nation. We're all part of one nation. We're all different parts of the same organism. In order for a king to be a king, what does he need? He needs to be separate from the people. A king needs to have a certain distinction, a certain aloofness, a certain separation from the people in order to be a king over the people. And therefore, in order for King David to not just be a descendant of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, is too similar to all the Jews to be a king over the Jews. Even more than that, not just that they're too similar. What's the lineage? What's the DNA of the forefathers, of the mothers, of the matriarchs? Kindness, compassion, even discipline, self-focus, right? All acts of kindness. goodness, love. That's the forefathers. That's the way a Jew is inherited. That someone, we know the Talmud says, that all Jews, by nature, are Rachmanim, they Rachmanim. We're merciful ones, the sons of merciful ones. That's part of the DNA of a Jew. A Jew loves to be merciful. The greatest insult to a Jew is to say to him that you're not nice, you're mean, you're taking advantage of people. But that's how, I don't get distracted. What happens to the Jewish people in Israel? When there's a war, they can win the war. The second they come to the Jews and say, oh, you're occupying our land and you're mean and how could you do this? The Jews start, oh, I'm sorry, please don't accuse me ever of doing that, right? A Jew by nature cares for the underdog. That's why all the Jews are always fighting for the oppressed, for the people they think are the victims. This is the nature of a Jew. A king needs to have a certain toughness to him, a certain achzarius, a certain cruelty. Now, obviously, the king has to be good in his heart. But a king has to be able to rule a nation. If the king is too kind, he's too good, he's too sweet, he won't be an effective ruler over the people. And therefore, in order to make sure he'd be a good king, he had to be grafted. The seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the seed of the Jewish kindness and compassion, of the Rachmanim, of the fact that every Jew by nature is so loving and kind and compassionate and caring, needs to be grafted with someone from Moab. The most different, most distant kind of people from the Jews. How do you know that they're the most distant from the Jewish people? The Torah says you can't marry ever. A Moabite ad olam, forever, cannot marry a Jew. So from the fact that the Torah tells you that the most distant kind of person is a Moabite, they can never marry into the Jewish people because they're so cruel, they're so wicked, that when the Jews were a poor little group of slaves escaping from Egypt, instead of coming out to greet us with food and water, they came out with an army. Such cruelty, such hate, such evil, dangerous. That's exactly the graft we're going to put into the lineage of King David to give him the ability to be a real king. Still has the seed of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, but has a certain strength, a certain toughness that makes him distinct from the rest of the Jewish people, and tough enough to fight the wars of the Jewish people and to win for the Jewish people.
So he went against the Torah.
No, this was allowed. The Torah says a male and not a female. By the way, what was King Shaul's problem? King Saul was not with this lineage of Moab. He was perfect, King Saul. Where did he mess up? Why did he lose the kingdom?
Because he didn't listen.
That was. What did he not listen?
God told him not to bring anything from the war.
God told King Saul to eradicate the nation of Amalek, right? Eradicate them, destroy them off the face of the earth, obliterate them. Nothing of them should remain. But Shaul was too kind. He was a Jew. He was a Jew. I should destroy everything, even the animals. I can bring offerings to them. It's a waste. I feel bad to destroy these good-looking sheep that can be offered in the house of God, not knowing that there was black magic going on. The reason why Shaul lost the kingdom was because he was too nice. And that's why King David had to be created with a more tough streak within him to give him the power and the ability to be a king.
Who was tougher, Shlomo's son or him?
Shlomo also was tough, but Shlomo was in a different style, different person. But that toughness exists in the blood, and that's why the son of Shlomo was even more tough, and that's why there was a civil war. But the point is, to be a king needed that toughness of Moab. Beautiful answer, no? Okay. Now, let's go. That's about why King David needs to come from the family of Ruth and the family of Moab. What do they add? They're grafting a new dynamic into the personality of King David that he never would have gotten from within the Jewish people themselves. Now, I'm going to tell you even more crazy. It's very late already, but I'm going to tell you an even more crazy story. This is the part of the story about the actual birth of David HaMelech himself. And then we're going to have to try and understand, if you think I had a question before, why God wants David to come from Moab, we're going to have to understand why God wants King David to be born the way he's born. Let's go back to our text. Read now what happens after Shaul loses the kingdom. So I'm going to read to you now from the book of Shmuel, chapter 16, verse 11 as well. Basically, it's the middle of the story where God says to Shmuel, the prophet, why are you mourning the fact that King Saul has lost his kingdom? Because already God had told Shmuel to tell Shaul he lost the kingdom. Don't be disappointed. Go to the house of Beis Lachem, Go to Beis Lechem. There, go to the house of Yishai. God says to Shmuel Navi, and there you'll find the new king of Israel. So Shmuel Navi goes. I'm telling you what it says earlier on in the chapter 16. Shmuel Navi comes. He tells, that's chapter 16. He comes to Yishai. He says to Yishai, gather all your sons. I want to have a peace offering together. I want to have dinner with you. Right? So what happens? 7 sons of Yishai come. And the first one stands up. He's a tall, good-looking guy. And Yishai says, this son is deserving to be the king. Look at how good-looking he is. And God says to Shmuel, don't look at the outside. God can see the heart of the person. I can see what's inside. And then the second son, and the third, the fourth, and the fifth, and the sixth, and all 7 sons come before Shmuel the prophet. And each and every one of them, God rejects, and Shmuel can see this is not the one on whom the Shekhinah is resting. Finally, verse number 11. So Shmuel turns to Yishai, he turns to Jesse. He asks, are these all the young men? I told you to call all your kids. How can it be? There's no more kids and God hasn't chosen one. So Yishai says, the youngest still remains, and behold, he is tending the sheep. And so Shmuel says to Jesse, send and bring him, for we shall not sit down to eat until he comes here. And he sent, and he brought him, and he was ruddy. He was red. He was a redhead. I like redheads. With beautiful eyes. A gingy, with beautiful eyes. And a handsome appearance. Why not, right? So he was a redhead with beautiful eyes. My wife says I have beautiful eyes. That's what she says. And my bubby says I'm of handsome appearance. So I think it's all there. Okay. And the Lord said... Yeah. Exactly. Why not? I'll take the job. If God chooses, I'll take it. Anyway, so David HaMelech, this redhead with beautiful eyes and a handsome appearance, walks into the room, and immediately God says to Shmuel, arise, anoint him, ki zehu, for this is he, the Shekhinah rests on him, the oil comes flowing out of the jug of the oil that Shmuel HaNavi had brought with him. The oil goes flowing, and all the brothers stand there quaking and shivering in awe and dread of the young brother that's now the new king. And Shmuel anoints the young King David in secret amongst his family, but Shaul doesn't know it all. The oil, that's anointing. It's anointing. This story makes no sense. Imagine the prophet comes to you and says, bring me all your sons, one of them is going to be the new king. Would you leave one of them out in the field watching the sheep? The prophet, Shmuel HaNavi, comes to Yishai, says, come, gather all your kids. God's going to choose one of them to be the new king. Why does he not bring David to the home? He leaves David out of the field. Not only that, after all 7 kids, none of them are the king. Yishai doesn't say, I have another son. Let me go bring him. In fact, according to the Medrash says that when David said, when Shmuel HaNavi says, these are all the sons, he says, yeah, I have no more sons. And Shmuel HaNavi says, it's impossible. There has to be another son. God sent me to anoint one of your sons. So he says, there's one more member of my family. But even in the text here, if you look at the text in what we just read, it doesn't say one of my sons. I'll share the screen again for 1 second so you can see how exactly does Yishai describe King David? What words does he use to describe him? Vayomer od, right here, Vayomer od sha'ar hakatan, which means the youngest still remains. Doesn't even say I have one more son. There's one more little kid. There's one young kid that's left outside. One kid remains. He's tending the sheep. Why would a father talk that way about his son? Right? Especially that son might be the new king of Israel. Oh, let's find out. So now I'm going to tell you a story. I read the story in the original. I have the translation, but it's too long, and it'll be more interesting if we say it orally, and we'll move a little faster. Here's a crazy story. Yishai was a very, very prominent member of the Jewish community. Very, very prominent member. He was a leader of the court. He was a prominent member. Yishai has 7 sons. But as Yishai is having all these sons with his very beautiful wife, he has a feeling of doubt. Jews have doubt and self-affliction, where we ask ourselves if we're worthy. Jews are good at that. We like to self-flagellate. And he starts to wonder if perhaps he's not allowed to have children with his wife. Why not? because there's rumblings, there's rumors in the street that the family of Yishai is tainted. You think the Edomite was saying that the family is not a good family out of the blue? There's already rumors. Family of Yishai is no good. They come from Ruth, the Moabite. And Moabites are not allowed to marry Jews. So it was a stain on the family of Oved. And then Yishai, that Boaz, got seduced by this beautiful girl, this young princess from Moab. He marries her. He's not allowed to. And they have children. These children, they're forbidden to the Jewish community. So King David is having children. And he keeps, sorry, not King David. Yishai, the father, keeps on having children. He keeps on saying, maybe my child is forbidden to the Jewish community. Maybe my child is not allowed to marry a Jew. That's very harsh. So finally, Yishai decides not being intimate with his wife anymore. He separates from his wife. 3 years go by where Yishai is not intimate with his wife. They're married still under one house, but they're living separately. They're separated. Nobody knows. This is a secret. You got to keep the family, name intact. So nobody knows, but Yishai and his wife are separated. One day, Yishai decides he wants to have more kids. 3 years of not being intimate with any woman that's taking its toll. He wants to have children. He wants to have a child. You're going to get complex. You guys ready for some Talmudic logic? He wants to have a child to be allowed to marry a Jew according to all opinions. So he comes to his maid. He says to his maid, purify yourself, prepare yourself. Tonight, I'm going to have a child with you. I'm going to have a child with his maid, his shifcha. What's the logic? I'll give you the logic first so you can appreciate what he was doing. By Jewish law, he says, I'm going to give you a get shikha, a divorce of freedom, on condition. If I'm a regular Jew, and the ruling that only a Moabite man cannot marry a Jew, but a Moabite woman could, which means that my grandmother or my great-grandmother Ruth was allowed to marry Boaz. I'm a regular Jew, my grandmother. In that case, you're freed and you're a Jew. When a slave, a non-Jewish slave, is freed from their master, they go to the mikvah, they're considered a Jew. So in that case, when you go to the mikvah to purify yourself for intimacy, you will become a Jew. But if the ruling is not correct, and I am really an illegitimate Jew because my grandmother is a Moabite, and the Moabites don't have Jewish children, then you remain a slave. You remain a maid. And the child that will be born with you will be considered a Jew or not a Jew? Not a Jew. The mother is a maid, a non-Jew. A non-Jew. So your child will be non-Jewish. And then, after the child is born, then I can free the child. It doesn't say this to her, but this is the explanation, the commentaries. What was Yishai thinking? I can free the child. So now the child will be considered, when the child was born, as a non-Jew. So the lineage of me, of the Moab family, does not go to this child who follows the lineage of the mother. And then when the young kid will be freed and converted, when you convert, you're like a brand new person. So this child will not continue the lineage of Moab. Confused? You understand? No, I'll explain it again. I'll explain it again. If Yishai, I'll say it this way. If a Jewish man is intimate with a maid, a non-Jew, when I say a maid, I don't mean like today you have a cleaning lady, I mean like, a non-Jewish bondwoman that was property of the Jewish master. If a Jew, not only that, the Jew has children with this non-Jewish maid, slave. What's the status of the children by Jewish law? No. Not Jewish. In fact, the Torah clearly says that if you have a Jewish slave who is intimate with a non-Jewish slave woman that works for you, when the Jewish slave goes free, the children remain the non-Jewish slave and they remain in the possession of the owner. So that's what's happening. Let me explain. That's the halacha. That's clear. So what happens if Yishai will father a child with his non-Jewish slave woman? The child will be non-Jewish. Not a Moabite. Let me explain this. So he'll be not a Moabite. He'll be a non-Jew. Correct? A regular non-Jew. Whatever nationality this slave woman was. Then he can free the child. When you free the child from slavery, he goes to the mikvah, he converts. When he converts, what is he? A brand new person. A Jew with no previous lineage. Instead, the convert goes to the mikvah, they come out brand new. When the convert goes to conversion, their parents are not their parents anymore. They're a brand new person. So they're like a brand new person who's came out like a brand new child. So they're pure, innocent of sin. Their previous relatives are not their relatives anymore from a Jewish law perspective. So the fact that he is the father of this child who went through a conversion won't matter because it's a brand new child. You understand? So this child won't be carrying the blemish of Moabite lineage that Yishai is carrying. You understand? Got it, Vivi? No, I'll explain later.
So what's the difference?
Yeah.
What's the difference if he has children?
Are you guys on Facebook following this? Yeah, let's see. Yeah.
What's the difference then if he had another child with his wife and then the child went to the mikvah? What's the difference between that and the scenario you just said?
Say again? I was listening.
I
I want to see if they're following on Facebook, if they're following along or not. Yeah.
Has a child with his wife and then the child goes to the mikvah and becomes a new child.
Well, the child can only go to the mikveh if the master frees the child.
So in this case, he wouldn't be the master, he'd be the father.
Well, he's both. He's the father and the master. He's the master. It's his slave woman, and now he's also fathering the child. So it's both. But after he frees the slave goes to the mikveh, becomes a Jew. So now this child, that's his child, but doesn't have his blemish, will be a full-fledged Jew, able to marry any Jew of the community. Got it? So that's what the deal he makes with her. If I'm a proper Jew, I free you, and you're a proper Jew. And we'll have Jews together. If I'm not a proper Jew, you remain a slave woman, and the child I'm going to have with you will be a non-Jewish slave, and then I can free the slave, and he'll be able to become a Jew without any blemishes of Moabite lineage. So he tells the slave, he says, they want to cheat on my wife and have a baby with you. Now, if you were this slave woman, how would you respond? You know how she responds? You know what she does? She goes to the mistress. She goes to Mrs. Yishai. She says, Mrs. Yishai, I don't know her name is, I'm a fan. Says, help me, what should I do? She says, what's the matter? She says, your husband wants to have a baby with me. Oh, yeah. She says to him, this is straight out of the Medrash, not the Medrash, out of the Mechilta, that's quoted by many other rabbis in later times. So she says to her, it says, her Amma Ne'emenes, her Amma like a trustworthy maid. And she says to her trustworthy maid, very trustworthy, the fact that she comes to the wife. So she says to her trustworthy maid, what should I do? It's already 3 years my husband won't be intimate with me because he's afraid of having children. So what do you want from me? Like, I don't know what to tell you. So she says, let's switch places. I'm going to go to the room tonight where he wants to meet me. When he told me to go lock the door, I'll go to lock the door. I'll open the door to lock it. I open the door to lock it. I'll sneak out, and you wait outside. You'll sneak in. You lock the door. It'll be dark, and you go be intimate with your husband, pretending like you're me, and so you can be intimate with your husband again. And I will be cheating on you, on your husband. That's what happens. That night, Yishai comes to the whatever they made up. He comes to the room. He tells his maid, "Go lock the door." She goes to lock the door to turn out the lights. So she goes to lock the door. She sneaks out, and Mrs. Yishai sneaks in. According to one version of the story, she's wearing the clothing of the maid. She comes in, and they conceive. She becomes pregnant from this intimacy. What? I don't remember her name. That's how, and David is conceived from this switch of the maid that Yishai thinks he's being with the maid, and really it's his wife. He does not know it's his wife. What happens next? You guys are smart. What happens next? She's pregnant! How miracle! And they didn't say she was a virgin Mary. Right? That was the other version. As a virgin Mary, she got pregnant not being with her husband. Yishai didn't believe in virgin marriage. Yishai didn't believe in virgins. Yishai was more practical. So he says, the only way my wife got pregnant, if I haven't been intimate with her in over 3 years, is if she found another man to cheat with me. Meaning that the child that she's carrying in her womb is a mamzer. Not his. She's a married woman. So it's not just that it's not his baby. This baby is a bastard by Jewish law. It's a child born out of wedlock that's not allowed to marry. Forget about maybe it's a Moabite child. Now it's for sure forbidden to marry a Jew because now it's a child born out of wedlock. The brothers of King David, the sons of Yishai, are so angry at their mother for disgracing the family name by having a child out of wedlock, they want to kill their mother and kill the baby. Because they were very important, prestigious lineage, family in the Jewish community. Now we know the family Yishai. Now the Moabites, the mother, whatever, she was sleeping around, she had a baby, blah, 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 blah. Yishai says, leave him alone. And so David becomes a part of the family, but he's the black sheep. He's the black sheep of the family. He's literally hated by his brothers for destroying the family name. They look at him like an outcast, like someone doesn't belong here. That's how they look at him. That's how they look at him.
But she used to whisper into his ears that he's not a mamzer.
Okay, she told. She never told her husband. She, David's mother, and the maid kept this a secret. The only two people who knew was David's maid. Yishai's maid and his mother, and King David never told. His wife never told Yishai what happened. I guess she didn't want to tell her. I cheated. She treated her like I tricked you. You think you tricked me and cheated on me. Actually, I don't know how much couples communicated back then. I don't know. I wasn't their marriage therapist. I can't tell you. But the fact is that Yishai's wife never told Yishai what happened. So now comes along. Now we understand the story. Shmuel Navi, the prophet Shmuel, comes to King David, to Yishai, says, bring me your sons. So is Yishai going to show a son that's not his son, that was born from another man out of wedlock? Absolutely not. Get into the field. Go take care of the sheep. I don't want you anywhere near the house. Shmuel comes, says, none of these 7 boys are the king. Do you have anyone else? According to one version of the story, Yishai said, no, I have no more sons. So Shmuel says, do you have anyone else in your family? He says, yeah, there's another young kid in the family, but he's not my son. He doesn't describe him as his son. Yishai, until this moment, thinks that David is not his child. And then David comes, all of a sudden, he finds out he's actually not his child, he's the king. That's why it says in Tehillim that at that moment, Yishai's wife said, Evan, Moasu Abaynim. We'll say tomorrow, so we're saying Halal. Evan. What's Evan? Aleph Beis Nun. Literally, it's a stone that the builders, the Bonim, disgraced, they despised it, became the cornerstone of the building. The brick that they didn't want became the cornerstone. Evan is Aben, this child, Ashamasu, not Haboinim, but Habanim, that was disgraced by the other sons. This child that was disgraced by the other sons, became the cornerstone of the whole Jewish people. And then all the brothers say, from God himself, this came out. And everyone together, Yishai and his wife and the children, and Shmuel said, that God made, let us rejoice in it. This is the story. And this is why, if you look into Tehillim, there's more than one verse where David alludes to his background. But the most clear verse, I'll show you only one out of several, is in Tehillim, chapter 69, verse 9. Look at your papers for a second. He says, Muzar hayisi le'achai. I was a stranger to my brothers. V'nachri, I'm like an alien to the sons of my mother. Muzar in Hebrew is very similar to the word mamzer. Mamzer. Mamzer hayisi le'achai. My brothers consider me like a mamzer. They consider me some stranger, didn't belong in the family. They looked at me like a nachri, like an alien to the sons of my mother. Meaning, they thought that we only are your half-brothers. We only share the same mother, but we have a different father. Therefore, David describes his brothers as the sons of his mother because they considered him like only the brother from their mother, not from their father. There's other verses as well, where King David says that I was conceived in sin. In sin, my mother transgression, my mother conceived me. Etc. Verses like that. Harsh story. Hard to understand. Hard to understand. And so I turn to my dear friends. I ask you, this is King David. Forget about that. His grandmother, or Yishai's grandmother, or King David's great-grandmother is a Moabite with all the questions about being a Moabite. This is worse. This is much worse. This is a child who for the first however many years of his life was considered a child but not a wedlock. Why would that happen? Why would God make the child who become the king of the Jewish people, the great-grandfather of Moshiach, the beginning of a whole new dynasty of God's chosen people to be the kings of the Jews for all of time? And God chooses King David. Why would God choose someone like this, or why would someone like this have to be born in such a convoluted way? What? Excellent. It will make him humble. That's actually a very good answer. This answer is brought that Shaul was perfect. It says about King Saul that he had no blemish. He was from a family that knows his father Kish had never sinned in his life. Shaul was from a perfect family, perfect everything. When you're too perfect, you lose touch with reality. When you have blemishes, it reminds you that you're also a human being. Don't forget what it's like to be a human. It's an excellent answer. Yeah.
To show the people, the Jewish people, that there's only one real person that's perfect and flawless, and that's Hashem.
Okay, that only God is flawless. Even our kings have very shady backgrounds. Okay.
That everybody has flaws. And
Everyone has skeletons. Correct. We all have skeletons in the back in our back closet. By the way, let's go a little bit back. Ready? I'm going to throw in the second and third part now because we're a little late on time. So we've talked about Ruth. We talked about her, right? How she came. We talked last week. How she came to Boaz in the middle of the night, and she pulled up the blanket and uncovered his legs, and she lied down next to his exposed legs and whatever. But let's go a little bit further back. What's the original origins of Ruth's family? Moab. Where does Moab come from? Who is the founder of the nation of Moab? The child called Moab. How was he born? Yeah. The two sisters. Remember the story? Barbara, remember the story? When Lot is escaping the city of Sodom. God sends angels to destroy the city of Sodom. And they run away and they go to a cave. And the two girls, the mother turned into a pillar of salt because she turned behind, so she became a pillar of salt. So there's only Lot and two daughters. And they run to a cave and they think that the whole world has been destroyed. So they decide to talk to themselves. It's in the Torah. So the older sister says to the younger sister, you remember the story? You're getting it right? You're remembering this. Coming back to you. It's a crazy story too. She said, let's get our father drunk. There was wine. There was grapes in the cave. Hashem organized that there should be grapes in the cave so they can get their father drunk. They got him drunk. He falls asleep. And in his drunkenness, she goes on, she's intimate with her father. And it says, he asks the technical questions. You can't ask questions. There's a Yiddish expression, you don't ask questions on the story. That's the way the story happened. He was drunk, and while he was sleeping, he didn't know what was happening to the Torah. He didn't know when he went to sleep or when he woke up, and she conceives from her drunk father, and she calls her son Moab, meaning May-Av. What is Av? Father. May-Av means from my father. So she calls her son the child born from my father. No discretion. No discretion at all. This is the child born May-Av from my father. In case you're curious how I conceived, now you know. Okay. Wow. This is Ruth's great-great-great-grandfather. A child born from the mother-father relationship where the guy's drunk and the daughter is having children with her father. What about Boaz? Where does Boaz come from? You know, who is his great-grandfather? Great-great-grandfather? Boaz is a descendant of Peretz. Now, you know who Peretz is? I'll give you a hint. He's one of two twins. The two pins, Peretz and Zerach. That's right. Peretz is one of the twins born to a woman called Tamar. How did Tamar become pregnant? So let me tell you Tamar was. Tamar is the daughter-in-law of Yehuda, of Judah. Yehuda has a son called Er. And he marries Er to this beautiful woman called Tamar. And Er dies, so then he marries his second son, Oinan, to Tamar. Oinan dies. So Yehuda says, I'm not giving any more of my boys. You're dangerous. My boys are dying with you. So he tells Tamar, you go back to your father's home in the meantime and let Shelah, the third child, get a little bit older. When he gets older, I'll invite you back to come marry my third son. He had no plans of letting her marry Shelah. What happens? Yehuda's wife dies. And after he mourns for his wife, he's traveling to go take care of his sheep. And on the way, he's traveling at the crossroads of the journey. And there is a prostitute. Dressed like a prostitute. Really, it's Tamar, his daughter-in-law. Very, very righteous woman who had been so sneeze and modest in the home. He didn't even recognize her when she was dressed this way. And he goes off the side of the road. He conceives. He's together, intimate with his daughter-in-law Tamar. And guess what happens? She becomes pregnant. He doesn't know who she is. And then he finds out that his daughter-in-law became pregnant. Also didn't believe in virgins. He says, she's cheating on my son, Sheila. Take her out to be burnt. And then Tamar sends a stick he had given as a collateral for payment, his stick and his signet ring and his cloak. And she says, whoever is the owner of these items, that's the father of my... Yehuda was a man, because Yehuda is honest enough to admit his sin. Yehuda says, Tzadka hi mimeni, she is righteous, the children are from me. And then they marry, at least according to one opinion, they marry and they stay married for the rest of their lives, Yehuda and Tamar. So Boaz comes from Yehuda and Tamar, where he has no idea what's going on. Ruth comes from Boaz, who was born from Lot and his daughter, and he has no idea what's going on. By the way, and then I'll tell you. I'll jump a little ahead. So if you follow the lineage over here, you follow the story, it gets, the first time is Lot and his daughter. When Lot is intimate with his daughter, Lot doesn't even know he's being intimate. He's out cold drunk. He's hammered, plastered. He has no idea what's going on. His daughter knows. These women are very smart, by the way. Ever since the woman not in charge of saying, see, every case, the man is clueless and the woman is organizing things. Every case, same story. The man is lost. The man is drunk. The man is confused. The man is seduced. And the women are conniving behind the man's back. Just saying, whoever says the Torah is a Shrabbistic book and makes men to be greater than women doesn't know all these stories. If you know these stories, you know that the Torah says that women are much smarter than men. Men are clueless. They were always clueless. They remain clueless. That's the joke. You know, they say about is Google or is a computer male or female? Male. Why say a computer is male? A computer. Why is a computer male? You can give the computer tons and tons and tons of data, but it's still clueless. The woman liked the joke. She didn't like it so much, huh? I think she liked it more than you. I got it. Okay, that. Really, I argue that a computer is female. Why is a computer female? Because it's good. You start typing something in, and they already finish the sentence. They already know what you want before you even typed it in. Yeah? Okay. Anyway, so the men are clueless. So in the case of Lot and his daughter, he's like really clueless. He doesn't even know what's going on. He's out cold drunk, plastered. Case of Yehuda, what does Yehuda think? Just a prostitute. He doesn't know it's his daughter-in-law. He's unaware of who he's being intimate with. Case of Ruth and Boaz, he was sleeping. She came, uncovered his legs, lied down next to him, but then he waits and said, let's go speak to Tov first, and then they marry properly. But then again with Yishai and his maid, again, the same thing. He's trying to have a child in the kosher way, so each of them is better. Lot's not trying to have a child. Yehuda, he doesn't do anything. Yehuda's not trying to have a child, he's just with a prostitute. Yishai is trying to have a child, but a kosher child, but not with his wife, with a different woman. In all these cases, there's subterfuge going on. There's women that are doing their stuff. So what's the deal? How do we understand why God wanted to happen this way? Yeah? You can't imagine there's any way I can explain this one, huh? Like, how's he going to get out of this one?
I could take a stab at it.
Yeah.
It's not where you're from, but where you're going.
It's true that it's not where you're from, but where you're going. There's truth to that statement, but I don't know that it justifies making the king of the Jewish people be born from a secretive union where the guy is imagining a different woman, thinking of somebody else, a really different child being conceived. No, that's... You're blown away. You're blown away. Okay, let's see if we can blow you back. So, let's deal with this. The Alter gives an explanation regarding the blessings that Yitzchak gives to his son Yaakov. You all know the story. That Yitzchak wants to give a blessing to his son, Esau. And what happens? Who switches? No, not the father, the mother. Rivka, also another woman. This woman is dangerous, so be careful. Rivka comes and tells her son, you go put on the clothing of your brother Esav, pretend you're Esav, and you're going to go get the blessing that your father thinks he's giving. So there's no intimacy over here, it says it's blessings. But it's the exact same thing happening. Yitzchak is being tricked to think that the one he's talking to is Esav when really it's Yaakov. Why? Why couldn't the blessings come direct? Why couldn't Rivka do what every good Jewish wife does when they don't like something the husband does and go tell them, hey buddy, you're wrong? You know, women know how to do that. Why do you have to use the whole backwards, whatever? Explains the Alter Rebbe that when a person is consciously aware of something, they're limited to their own awareness, to their own consciousness. You're limited to your own consciousness. So when you do a mitzvah, when you give a blessing, so let's take the example of Yitzchak. If Yitzchak would have known that he's giving a blessing to Yaakov, the blessing would have been limited to the depth of awareness and consciousness that Yitzchak could possess. But when he's giving a blessing, not knowing what he's doing, unaware of who he's blessing, the blessing then is coming from a much deeper, much more powerful place than his consciousness. And therefore, the blessing that Yaakov received was much greater than the blessing that Yitzchak could have given him if Yitzchak would have known that he was talking to Yaakov. Understand? When you know something, no matter how smart and intellectual and holy you are, your awareness of the situation now condenses you, limits your awareness to your awareness. You can't transcend your own awareness. Not planning to anyway. But sometimes when the opportunity comes to transcend your own awareness, meaning that you're not even aware of what's going on, it's something which is beyond your consciousness and awareness, the blessing can be far greater. And therefore, in order for Yaakov to receive the greatest blessings that are so great that Yitzchak can never on his own initiative have in his blessings to give Yaakov, he had to be tricked in order to allow his consciousness to be like put to the side and just be a conduit for something greater than his own awareness to give Yaakov much greater blessing than he could give on his own. I'll give you an example of this. In the Tosefta, there's a story of a man who once left a bundle of wheat behind in his field. Now, what's the law? We talked about it last week. What's the law when you leave a bundle of wheat behind in your field? You have to leave it for the poor. It's called shikha. Shikha means start to the corner of the field and the leka, which are the little gleanings, one or two stalks that fall off. You left it behind the bundle. It's forgotten. It goes to the poor. He was so excited that he was able to do the mitzvah of shikha, of forgetting a bundle to give to the poor. He tells his son, quickly go take an animal and go to the base of Mikdash, bring an offering of thanks that I had the opportunity to do this mitzvah of shikha. So his son asks him, what's so good about this mitzvah? How we give charity? Give a lot of charity. Why is this mitzvah unique? So he explains to his son, every other mitzvah I'm able to plan it for it. This mitzvah, I couldn't do it on my own. If you plan to give a bundle of wheat to the poor, it's a beautiful mitzvah, it's tzedakah, it's charity, but is it the mitzvah of shikha, of forgetting a bundle? No. If you planned it, it's not forgotten. The only way you can do the mitzvah of shikha is if you forget, meaning that you're not aware of what you're doing. God says, I'm going to give you a mitzvah that's greater than what you plan to do. You plan to leave the corner. You plan to leave the leka. You plan to give the 10%. I'm going to give you an opportunity now to transcend your own awareness, to do a mitzvah even greater than you could have imagined. Therefore, run to the temple to go give an offering. It says in the Gemara, Ein ben David ba ella behesach hadas. Should actually put into the text, actually. It says in the Gemara that Moshiach will only come, Ben David will come, only behesach hadas. What does hesach hadas means? Hesach hadas means to forget. From a lack of awareness. I really should put it into the text so you can see it. Moshiach will only come, says the Gemara, it's a Gemara, when we're not paying attention. When we're not expecting it, that's the moment Mashiach will come. Behesach hadas, if you're not paying attention. It's a long film. If you forget to wait till Hesach hadas. So Mashiach will come when we forget to wait for Mashiach. How can Mashiach, can we forget to wait for him? Behesach hadas, every day we daven 3 times a day, asking and begging for Mashiach, praying for Mashiach, searching for Mashiach, yearning for Mashiach, right? Our whole lives are waiting for Mashiach. So what do you mean Mashiach won't come only if we forget? Exactly, we'll never forget. So how will Mashiach come?
It's like at some point people are going to start losing hope, maybe, and then.
So simply it can mean that when we think that all hope is lost, that's when Mashiach will come. That's a simple explanation. Based on what I just explained to you now, what does it mean the Mashiach will come in the way of Hesach Hadas, where we're not paying attention, where we're not expecting it? If we're expecting it, it can't come because Mashiach will be so transformative, so beyond our consciousness, so beyond our imagination, that we won't even be able to imagine what Mashiach will be like. As long as we're trying to imagine what Mashiach will be like, we're trying to put into our minds and to plan for it, etc., we're limiting ourselves. We're limited to our own consciousness. When we are able to transcend and we're not paying attention, means something is happening greater than any possible potential we can have. That's when Mashiach will come. You know what it says? There's two kinds of people who fail. Those who fail to plan, and those who stick to their plan. If you don't plan, you're going to fail. But if you're so rigid that you can't ever see the opportunity and improvise and move from your plan, you're stuck in your plan. You're stuck in your plan. Moshiach will be a transformation that's not anything we could ever plan in our finite minds. This is why the birth of Moshiach, both from light and from Yehuda and Tamar and with David and Yishai and his wife, to give birth to David, had to come in a way where the person was not aware of what he was doing. The father was oblivious to the impact he was creating at that moment. The woman knew, because the women are in a much higher state of spiritual awareness. They can receive a much higher level of divine blessing than a man can. Therefore, the women were aware of what was going on. But the man couldn't understand what was happening at that moment. Because if he would understand what was happening, the soul that he'd be bringing to the world through that act of intimacy would be limited to his mind. We know that when we're intimate, our thoughts create the body of our child. So if you have holy thoughts and pure thoughts during intimacy, you create holy, that's not like a black and white guaranteed, but generally speaking, you create children that are more refined, good kids. If the fathers in these cases would have been able to consciously be aware of what they were doing, the child that they were conceiving would have been limited to their consciousness and their awareness. By their conception happening in a way that they did not know what was going on, allowed them to be conduits of a divine soul that far transcended what they could have ever done on their own. Understand? Make sense? The soul that they were able to bring into the world, both lights from the Moab side, and Yehuda and Tamar from the Boaz side, and then the actual birth of David, the beginning of the Davidic dynasty, such intense holy souls were being given to the universe. With awareness, the fathers could not have done that. They had to be beyond their own awareness to be conduits to such a holiness. Now, I really had a third Kabbalistic explanation. It's kind of late. Should we go Kabbalistic very, very quickly? Very, very quickly. Very quickly. The Al-Shech is saying, I'm going to go through the reincarnations. It's like another 20 minutes. So we're going to do like in 5. We'll try. The Kabbalistic aspect of this. Really, there's two parts of this. Number one is the reincarnations. That light is the reincarnation of Yehuda, who is the reincarnation of Yishai. By the way, side note, the maid of Yishai is the reincarnation of Hagar, which is why Hagar was with Abraham, gave it to Ishmael. The maid of Yishai was not with Yishai, fixed that instead his wife could have a child instead. But anyway, light and Yehuda and Yishai are all one soul. And the mother of Moab and Tamar and Ruth are all another soul. Same soul. Which is why it says in the Tanakh that Ruth, Vatelech, she went, Vatavaya, and she came, and she went to the field of Boaz. When she came, and then she went, and then she came to go to the field of Boaz. She left one life, come back. She came back in another body, in the body of Ruth, and that's when she came to the field of Boaz. To finish the story, she started by the birth of Moab from her father. Now, why would such a holy soul like Moshiach have to come through trickery, through a way where the same soul is impregnating herself through her drunk father, or through impersonating a prostitute to convince her father to have a child with her, or by coming to Boaz when she's a Moabite and all that? Why did it have to be that way? And then the story also of Yishai's mother, of Yishai's wife. So explains the Arizal in Shar HaGegulim, the gates of reincarnation, as follows. And sometimes there's such a holy soul that the forces of Klippa don't want to allow the soul into this world. Now, how does Klippa have power over soul is a discussion. What does Klippa mean is a discussion, which I was going to explain, but we're not going to explain it now. Point is that there's unholy forces that limit. They don't want holy souls coming to the world. So they try and block it. So what does God do? God tricks the Klippa. And he says, in this kind, Klippa says, look at this. Here's a man who thinks he's being intimate with a prostitute. Or here's a guy who's drunk, who thinks he's nothing. Or here's a guy who thinks he's with his mate when it's truly his wife. In this kind of union, in this kind of intimacy, here we will concede and allow the Holy Soul to come, thinking it will not be able to reveal its true potential. That's for the greatest souls, not only with Moshiach. Another example that Rizal gives Rabbi Akiva. Who was Rabbi Akiva? One of the greatest souls of all the Jewish history. Who's the parents of Rabbi Akiva? Who? His grandparents were converts. His parents were haters of the rabbis. They weren't just converts. A lot of the converts, also converts bringing holy souls, and again, the same thing. They come from a non-Jewish family. But not only was Akiva from a family of converts, you're correct, his parents hated the rabbis. But when he was younger, said, if you give me a rabbi, I'll tear him apart with my bare hands. He grew up in a house that didn't teach him aleph base. What kind of home did he grow up in that a Jewish boy couldn't read the Hebrew alphabet? A poor, uneducated, ignorant family that hated Judaism. Such a holy soul, into such a family, the forces of unholiness agree that such a holy soul can go into that place. From there, that holy soul is actually able to come out of its unholy origins to reveal its true potential, its true power. But this is the same thing with the soul of David, that such a holy soul that would create such a holiness in the universe, Klippa only, forces of impurity only allowed it to come through a way that was so seemingly unholy that they thought it would not be able to reveal and to reach its true potential for true holiness. And that's the story, my friends. Laila Tov.